Welcome to Film at 50, a podcast that celebrates semi-centennials in the world of cinema. I'm your host, Brian Rowe. Very thrilled to welcome Danny Jarabek back to the podcast today for a pretty big one, a movie that's pretty well known. Maybe not everybody has seen it, but most people know the title. Today we're talking The Day of the Jackal, released in May of 1973 from director Fred Zinnemann. How are we doing, Danny?
I am wonderful. Thank you so much for having me back, Brian. I guess I did something right if you're going to have me on for another discussion here.
Yes, you did something right. So yeah, I try every month on this podcast. I've been doing this for 2.5 years. I try every month to have at least one new guest that I've never had on the show before. And we talked about Scarecrow about 2 months ago, the drama with Al Pacino and Gene Hackman. And like, you had me laughing and he had multiple points. You brought in so many interesting perspectives about that movie, which is kind of like kind of an under the radar film. Most people don't know. Yes. Scarecrow. If you were to say to someone, have you seen the movie Scarecrow before? They'd be like, you mean Batman Begins? I think that's what that was called, right? So they would be confused. And yeah, I just thought we had a good chemistry on that episode. So I thought we'd come back and talk about another big 1973 title, or I guess bigger than Scarecrow. I feel like more people know of Day of the Jackal, but did not realize this was 2.5 hours long. And something tells me with the film having 0 stars in it, like nobody really that you recognize, I wonder if people in 2023 are still revisiting this movie. It'd be surprising to me.
I think they should, first of all, but also second of all, does this mean we can only talk about movies when we get together about a movie that has an animal in the title?
Yes, it can only be animal films, animals in the title. And there has to be like some intensity and excitement, at least at a few scenes. Can't just be boring all the way through.
Well, count me in because I'm sure we can find more.
I have had guests like sometimes there will be a coincidence. Like I have a guest on, a few months later they come back and they're like, so why did you ask me to come back for this movie that has this, like the same thing that was in the last one? Usually it's totally a coincidence, as it is with this.
I was just about to be like, well, maybe he had this in mind, but
no, I mean, occasionally, like I'll have a guess at like, I'd love to come back if you do a horror film, and then I'll find like a really cool, scary movie to bring him back for. But yeah, usually, I mean, it is kind of like casting. I used to work in casting, Danny, in Los Angeles for 2.5 years. And so like, I look at the list of the next month's movies and I'm thinking, who would be good for that one? And I don't know why. I was like, oh, I think Danny would be good for Day of the Jackal. Like, he's a smart guy. This is like a kind of a high quality thriller. It's not like your everyday run of the mill. Like, this is like an Oscar nominated, like great director. Like, I think Danny's the guy to go to for this one.
We definitely expanded our scope from Scarecrow to this one for sure. We've jumped up in profile a little bit here, and I'm excited because I think this was a fantastic choice, and I didn't really know much about it, but I am very glad to be talking about it today.
Yeah. So to start with here, like, take me through the history of like had you heard of this movie before? Like before you watched it for this, like what was your knowledge of The Day of the Jackal? Anything?
Blind, completely blind. You said, do you want to talk about Day of the Jackal? I said yes. And that was all that ran through my head. I went into it completely blind, did not know anything about it, didn't know who it was directed by, didn't know who starred in it, didn't know what genre it was. So it was all very much a surprise to me going into watching it. And I honestly kind of liked that experience with this movie because it was what I got was something that I was pretty utterly fascinated with all the way through. And so I think just that experience of going in not really knowing what to expect actually helped the viewing experience for me personally on this one.
So going into this, you didn't know who Edward Fox was?
No.
The lead of the film, which the studio, of course, wanted a big star. You know who were the two that the studio wanted?
I don't.
Robert Redford or Jack Nicholson.
That checks out for 1973.
Yeah, according to what I read online, like they actually like auditioned for this project for the director, like read for him or met with him or something. it wasn't just like names thrown out, like, oh, like maybe we could get this guy to be in it. And Fred Zinnemann, the director, like was just absolutely adamant. He did not want any stars in this movie. He thought it would be distracting for the audience. And he wanted this to just be a movie where you just settle in for a wild ride and you're not focused on any sort of star persona. Do you think that was the right choice to not have a major star in the lead role?
Well, from my perspective, I can't speak to the studio's perspective that probably wanted to make more money on
Right.
this. But from my perspective, I do think that was very much a smart decision on Zinnemann's part, because I think following this sort of anonymous figure matched by the anonymity of his persona as an actor actually worked to benefit the film and the story extremely well. And so I do think that was a really smart decision. And I actually am someone who does sometimes get distracted by a star personas and have difficulty sometimes separating actor from character, especially if it's someone that I've seen, play whoever they kind of are typecast as, but then trying to play out of that. I really kind of struggle to like get past that and follow them along in this new character. And so I actually do really love when I see someone who I haven't seen before kind of take on a big role like this that could have gone to a star, but went to someone we don't know, and we kind of get a completely fresh perspective from their turn here as whatever character they're portraying.
Yeah, I always find it thrilling when I'm watching any movie, whether it's a new movie or an older movie, where I don't know anybody in the cast, because you just really just go with the story. And even in like really great films with big stars, you have to like take a minute. Like you have to be like, okay, I know this person. I've seen this person in 30 other movies. And it always does take a scene or two to kind of like settle in and be like, okay,
Right.
this is who he or she is playing. And you don't have to, and you don't have that. Yeah, and you don't have that in Day of the Jackal at all. You just like are like, okay, this is a kind of an historical film, and it's a thriller, and then more. I would say it's more of a drama than a thriller. I think to call this a thriller is kind of misleading. Would you disagree with that?
It doesn't operate at the pace of what a thriller would operate as in a modern audience lens. Definitely, for sure, would agree with that.
Yeah,
it's more of like a procedural thriller, if you would want to call it something like that.
Yeah, I mean, this is the quietest, slowest thriller I think we've ever seen. Like,
there were very few moments where I was like out of my seat thrilled, I can say.
I mean, there's one at the end. We'll spoil the ending.
We
the
will.
Ending is great.
We will.
But yeah, there's no music really in this movie, right? Like there's no score past the opening titles.
That's something I definitely want to talk about, because I have a lot of thoughts on that front.
Which is unusual for a quote unquote thriller. Like usually you're getting beaten over the head with score in any movie that's trying to be suspenseful and have tension. Like if you you can look at some great thrillers and just turn down the sound, turn off the music, and you'll be like, huh, this is kind of clumsy. But then you get like probably the best example is in that scene. Have you seen Misery with Kathy Bates and James Caan, the Stephen King adaptation?
No, I haven't. No,
there's this one.
Actually, someone just asked me if I had seen that recently too. Like,
it's really good.
That's kind of weird.
It's one of my favorite films. Like, definitely check it out. It is fantastic. Kathy Bates is like amazing in that movie. But there's this one scene where she locks him into his room and she leaves to go get him paper for him to type this new manuscript. And he's basically being held prisoner, and he gets out of the room and he's going through the house and he's looking around trying to find an escape. He can't find one. He's like clear across the house. All of a sudden he hears her car and she is pulling up, and he's got like maybe 30 seconds to get across the house, back into that room, lock the door, over to the bed. If she finds out that he got out of that room, he's going to be in deep trouble. And so if you watch the scene, it's like maybe a minute and a half of him getting back to the room, like without music. It's kind of dull and kind of stupid. It's just like cutting back and forth between him like rolling his wheelchair across the house to her getting out of the car. She drops the paper, picks it up. But there's this amazing heart-pounding score that makes that sequence incredible. Like it's one of the most suspenseful scenes of that movie for sure, and probably, you know, like any movie around that time. And I think sometimes score does help a scene, and it's not a bad thing. You don't be like, oh, this is just the composer, you know, taking a trash scene and making it, you know, tolerable. It's like you can take a decent scene, a good scene, and then make it great with score. And that's something that's definitely lacking in Dave the Jackal. Fred Zinnemann, I think I have it here somewhere. He said, like, he did not want any music. He said it deliberately refused. He deliberately refused to use any sort of score in the movie on the grounds that it would distract from the tension. That's what he said. Do you believe that?
I might have a hot take here.
You agree?
I actually agree with him.
Okay. So why do you
I
think this movie didn't need any music?
I was utterly fascinated by the lack of music because it did exactly what he said. My awareness was constantly heightened to the tension of more minutia happening with whether it's our main character Fox, played by Fox the Jackal, whoever we're operating with on that Fox's side of the story, or the commissioner side of the story, and the police and government. We're operating on parallel sides here. I felt consistently very much heightened to the minutia and the complexities and the nuanced layers of how they're operating within their networks and their sort of cobwebs of intuition and procedural work. I felt just very alert and aware to that. And I also felt, something I really enjoyed simultaneous to the no score was the film editing as well, to kind of comparable hand in hand with the sound editing, where it would sort of like silently cut to from like moment to moment or place to place. And I actually do agree with Zinnemann. I think the lack of the refusal to let the score sort of drive it forward kept this very heightened consistency, and it's a deliberate pace, but it feels like it moves so fast, because it is a 2.5 hour movie, but this flew by for me personally. And I don't know, maybe it's a hot take, but I do agree with them. I think the lack of score actually heightens my intuition and my sort of synchronicity with all of the detailed minutia of how they're operating in this world.
Yeah, it's a bold choice because I feel like most directors in the early 70s, they've got this property. Like the safe choice would be to hire a big movie star and you make it an hour 40 and you have lots of scenes of action and tension and score, pounding on the soundtrack. And Fred Zinnemann's like, no, like I don't think Fred Zinnemann cares at all about genre at all. Like he just wants to tell his stories. What did I read something yesterday? Like saying that Fred Zinnemann is a director who he would always focus on the story. He was never trying to put his own like thumbprint on any movie. It was just like, okay, he'd read the script and if he responded to it, he would just tell the story as best he could. And that did really well for him throughout his career. I mean, he has like 3 to 4 like total like bona fide classics. I mean, we'll talk about his career a bit at the end. But he's not approaching this like, how can I really thrill the audience? Like it's kind of a procedural and it's a lot of scenes of men in rooms talking. And it's this really creepy main character, the Jackal, played by Edward Fox, who I think it's like scarier as the movie goes on. Like in the last half hour, he becomes like just a really intimidating, threatening force of nature who like changes his appearance more than 2 or 3 times, and you never really know where he is or what he's planning and how he's going to conduct his final mission, which he gets very close to carrying out at the end. But he doesn't quite make it. But
that's where I think the decision to cast Edward Fox as a more or less anonymous figurehead for this character at the time actually really worked for me, because you think about something not comparable in terms of genre, but like someone like Bond, right? Like the persona of Bond is through the actor, that we know what type of physicality, we know what type of persona that they're going to bring to that. And it's certainly within like the Bond figurehead, but it's also associated very much with who's portraying Bond in that era, like the Daniel Craig Bond, the Roger Moore Bond. Like, what type of Bond you're getting through how they bring life into that character. Whereas here, you have your criminal, but we don't know who he is. We actually don't even know his name. We don't know his name as in in real life. We're not familiar with this actor very much. I mean, maybe you are, but
no,
I personally wasn't. And so it's that shroud of mystery, that shroud of anonymity that sort of just adds to the eerie mystery and that sort of characteristic of this character that just makes it feel so unnerving about him.
Yeah, it's interesting. I was like, I don't think I've seen this guy in any other movie. And then if you pull up his IMDb, he has 116 credits.
A lot of credits.
He's in Gandhi. He's in A Bridge Too Far. That's a famous film from 1977. He's in a Bond film called Never Say Never Again with Sean Connery.
Well, there you go.
Which is like the worst one. Like, have you ever seen that one? That one's horrible. But his last credit is 2018. What a Way to Go Out. Johnny English Strikes Again. Starring Rowan. Is that Rowan Atkinson? Yep. Rowan Atkinson. And so, yeah, he's had a long career. So, like, we must have seen him in some other projects. But maybe he just looks a little different now than he did, back in 1973. But I think in, like, 73, he was pretty unknown. Let me see. Did he have anything before this? Yeah, he's acting as early as 1962 on television, but it looks like he wasn't in
a lot of TV. It looks like
it's mostly TV. He starts doing more movies around 68, 69. Oh, he's in The Go-Between from 71. That's a movie I almost did an episode for, and then I watched it and I didn't like it, and I said I don't need to do that one. He's also
returned to Edward Fox.
I would have known. He's also in A Doll's House from 73, starring Jane Fonda. He has second credit, or at least on IMDb. Yeah, so he's right under Jane Fonda. So I don't think I'm doing that one. That came out also in May in France, but it didn't come out here until it premiered on television. Interesting. So yeah, he's a pretty prolific actor, and I was kind of surprised looking at this just now that I didn't know who he was. Because he was brand new to me in this movie. I didn't know, like, boy, he has a very, like, I mean, his look is, I feel like if he had been like the right age for the Terminator 10 years later, he would have been perfect. Right?
I can see
just
it.
Beef him up a little bit. But so I guess my enthusiasm is a little bit more muted than yours. I did feel the length of the movie. Like, I liked a lot of what Zinnemann was doing. I found it ironic that the movie got one Oscar nomination and is for best editing, because I felt like this movie could have been shaved off by a good 20 minutes. You felt like the length was just right?
I'm back in Zinnemann here. I'm Team Zinnemann on his decisions with this production. And this is even like, I've been crazy busy in the past week, and when I saw the runtime on this, I was like, how, when am I gonna do this? I was like, oh god, what did I agree to? But no, I
you got into it,
started watching it, and I just started zooming through it. Like, it felt like it flew by. I don't know, something about this just really clicked for me in terms of the pacing, in terms of the how it is deliberate. Sure, there's a lot of scenes that are mostly men talking, as you said, but I feel like the major plot points that are kind of far more spread in the beginning, actually, then it kind of heightens toward the end. The distribution of plot points actually just felt very smooth to me for the most part. Until the very end. I do have some things I want to bring up at the end, but
really, your quibbles with the film or the end?
My quibbles are with the end, yeah,
because that's where I felt like the movie finally really took hold for me. Was like the last half hour.
Wow.
The last half hour was where I really
well, my
enjoyed
quibbles
it.
are actually with like the last 5 to 10 minutes,
okay.
Like the very very end, yeah.
But
the last half hour, yes, that it does take off for sure.
It takes off a little bit. We open with this great scene of so what? It's the president of France. Let's just go through the story a little bit, because there's this assassination attempt in the opening scene, that's done. And there's never a shot in this movie that's done for style. There's no like Hitchcockian kind of like, I mean, there's a little bit. There's one in an apartment, which I want to talk about. That's kind of interesting. But like, it's just kind of matter of fact. Like this car is going by, and then these assassins try to kill, is it President Charles de Gaulle?
Charles de Gaulle, yeah.
Charles de Gaulle. And they get close, right? But they shoot at this vehicle multiple times, and then it doesn't even, like, nobody's phased, right? Like, does anyone get injured in the attempt?
140 shots, no injuries.
Like, what do they say? Like,
and
one
it points
shot,
out that
like, got
an
close
inch
to
of
his
his
head.
head.
Yeah. So that's
So-
called luck right there.
I actually, based on, you know, some cursory research, aka one 30-second Google search,
Yeah.
it is historical fiction beyond potentially that initial moment with the assassin. Like,
Did that happen? That scene
apparently
that
the
moment happened?
OAS was a real-ish organization to some extent, and there was some sort of plan or attempt at a plan. Maybe that shooting was even real. I'm not 100% sure, but everything after that was fiction. But there is some like maybe tiny nugget of truth in the beginning, I think.
Okay, so there wasn't a real Jackal.
No, the Jackal I think is made up.
I like to think there was someone out there. They just
well,
never
maybe if there was, we wouldn't know.
They never found them, you know. But so that's the setup, and then I want to say after that scene, which is really, you know, it grabs you by the throat. It's great. There's really nothing in terms of like intensity, thriller, mystery for about an hour. It's mostly a lot of scenes of groups of men in rooms talking. And I felt like that could have been moved along a little bit more in a movie that's 2.5 hours. That didn't bother you at all? Didn't you feel like the first hour it kind of took a while to get going?
I can see where you're coming from.
Yeah.
I'm not gonna disagree with you on the early first into second acts pacing too much. But I do think there is some really interesting character building going on in that time. You know, we get introduced to the Jackal. We really don't have any sort of backstory on him, so we don't know who he is, barely know where he's coming from, how he's going to operate. And then we're introduced to, of course, his opposition, who he doesn't know who it is, but Commissioner LaBelle as this detective that's brought in. I will admit too, one thing that I was attracted to during this time frame is, you know, you said there's nothing like super glamorous or eye-catching about the cinematography, but one thing I do appreciate in terms of world building in this portion of the movie is that it's so determined to shoot on location in various parts of Europe. What I can imagine would be to very great expense too. And so that is something I did appreciate in terms of world building and character building too. But I guess maybe I'm a little biased too, because I just love movies that are set in Paris. Because I've spent time in Paris. And so every time I see a movie set in Paris, I'm just like, I've been there. That's cool. I stood right there. Yeah, that's cool.
When you're watching a classic film that's like that has a scene in a place you've been for real.
Yeah.
I had the weirdest experience recently. I didn't watch it for the podcast, but I love Walter Matthau. I watched this 1973 film called Charles Varick, something like that. And there's a scene where he pulls up to an apartment complex, and I literally like fell out of my sofa. Like I fell to the floor because it's like an historical landmark here in Reno, Nevada that I've driven past 1,000 times. And like the shot in the movie was like where I've often parked right there to walk up and go to the bar and stuff. And it was like straight out of my experience, but in 1973. So everything looked kind of different, but I knew that was the place. And I looked it up I was like, is this? Oh yeah, they did shoot in Reno. Oh my God. So that's pretty much, that never happens. There's not a whole lot of movies that shoot here, but yeah, when it comes to Paris, I'm so glad you mentioned that, because that is one of the great things of the Day of the Jackal is the use of locations. You never get a sense that we're on a soundstage somewhere.
Right.
And I feel like that would be death in this movie.
That would absolutely murder the movie, because what's so captivating about the Jackal story is how you are kind of on this wide open landscape of like, he could be anywhere in this city, in this country, in this continent of Europe. Like
Yeah.
that shroud of mystery that expands beyond borders is only able to be achieved through these multi-location shots. I don't think you'd have to build a million sets and spend $1 billion to make it feel as wide open and as vast and as shrouded in world building mystery as to where what his whereabouts are, to
Mm.
achieve a similar sort of feel as you're getting with the location shots here, I think.
Yeah, I feel like, I mean, there's even some at the end, that little apartment where he does like the judo chop on that old lady, which made me think of Austin Powers, by the way. And he's like,
That
judo chop.
was that was ruthless. That poor woman. I hope she's okay.
Like she's probably okay, right? She didn't die from that. He just hit her,
That
but
would
she's
that would
old.
be a heck of a judo chop if she
Was
if
dead.
she went out on that. That would not a great way to go. No, I imagined he like put her in a closet or something, like, and she like woke up like a few hours
Yeah,
later, and the
just
police
just
had to
kind of with a
explain
headache.
the police had to explain to her that uh the largest criminal, the most wanted man in all of Europe was
I just I
was in the apartment above her.
I just loved it. Was just like this sweet old lady. He's like, "May I have a glass of water?" And she's like, "Oh yes, come on in." So tell me, young man, how was your day? What is a she just falls.
It was, even I was caught off guard by it,
Well,
like knowing.
you knew
I
he
know,
was
I
going to
knew.
use that
I
space for his final shot, so it made sense that he
yeah,
would knock her
yeah.
out.
You knew that he couldn't like leave her alive or conscious at the very least because of what he had to do. I was still surprised by the abruptness of his attack in that moment.
And that's another example of a scene where another director could have shown that from 3 different angles and like really built up the suspense. He could have put the camera in
Right.
front of her as she's talking, and he slowly kind of comes towards her from the back and then hits her or something, or she like looks up and
Exactly.
zoom in on the eyes, or like, and it's just like matter of fact, camera's just like mounted, and he just like it's from the back, and then he just does this, and she falls, and it's like there's no Zinnemann is as uninterested in any
Right.
sort of like crafting a moment of like tension through like the camera or editing. It's like we're just gonna tell the story, right?
It's a refusal to really follow cinematic conventions of this type of genre, I would say. And I mean, I appreciate the effort that he put in to make this feel more cinema verite, if you
Mm,
will, and almost, just kind of capturing it as it's happening without a cinematic enhancement. He actually refuses to use some of the tools that could be at hand that would typically serve to enhance these dramatic moments in a way. And
yeah.
I think by sort of minimizing that, it actually enhances it in a completely different way.
Yeah, and the reason I mentioned that apartment scene was that that did not feel like a set. That felt like a real place, but it was also very tight and contained. And I'm like, if they're shooting in a real apartment here, like where do we put the crew? Like where do we put the camera? Like it's very small. So that was also intriguing too. Like if every scene in this movie is done for real on a real location, not on a set or a soundstage, like where does everything go? Like I've made films before. I've made some on location. I've made some on a soundstage. I did one on a soundstage once, and when I was in college. And you feel like sometimes when you're on a real set, like everything's so contained, like there's nowhere for the crew to be sometimes, and you're like, how do I do this? So whatever they did to accomplish that, well done, because you never feel like you're on a set in this movie, and that also is what makes it, as you said, very strong.
One thing I do want to point out too, kind of going back to some of the early setup in the
Mm-hmm.
first into second act that
Yeah.
becomes more apparent in the sort of territory of the movie we're talking about here, is that there's multiple things that the Jackal does and that the police commissioner does, or detective commissioner, however you want to kind of describe him. Both of these key figures, there are things that they do in the early stages of their trajectories that come back into play later on, especially for the Jackal, especially with this scene in particular, because he makes the imprint of that key
Oh,
very
right.
early in the movie, and that comes back. That has that payoff probably an hour and a half, hour 45 minutes later at the
Mm-hmm.
very least.
Yeah.
And so I think that's a really, I mean, that's a credit to the script too. I love when, it's a Chekhov's gun, of course. Like, if you're going to copy a key, of course he's going to end up using that key later on. But I still think it was an effective structural screenplay decision to have these moments of strategy that are occurring early on. You might not know how or where it's going to play out yet, but it eventually does work its way back in really sort of potent moments where it just kind of brings it all together. And I think it's just a credit to the craft of the screenplay. I think moments like that.
Yeah, I mean, Zinnemann is always focused on the little details. Like nothing in this
Yeah.
movie is done just for no reason. Like I do appreciate that about what he's doing here. And it did kind of feel like a movie that in the hands of anyone else would have been a very different kind of project. It would have had a different feel. You really feel like you get the sense of like the time and place of these characters. So I appreciated that about the movie.
I think it's definitely an example of, people say there's 1,000 ways to shoot a script.
Yep.
And this is very much where, different directors would have shot this in completely different ways. And this
Mhm.
could have been totally, it could have been like a hour 45-minute high paced action thriller with the
Yep.
same script, I think very, very easily. And so
Starring
I
Charles Bronson.
yes. Robert Redford as the
Charlton Heston.
Jackal.
Imagine Charlton Heston as the Jackal. That would have been a movie. He would have been like betting women and all throughout the film. Oh, I'm sorry. I thought you were still talking.
I didn't have anything.
No, I mean, like he even admitted, Fred Zinnemann admitted after the fact, like, yeah, I think the movie would have been more profitable. It would have done better if we had had a star in the lead. Like he even admitted that after the fact. But it's like, I mean, that's what's strange about some of these older films is like, if there's not a major star in the film somewhere, like sometimes it's difficult to have that longevity 50 years later. Like not a lot of people are watching it. And like typically if you have a really strong director, like usually it can last. But I think about like Alfred Hitchcock. I feel like in the beginning knew, like he's like, I'm gonna hire big stars to be in these movies, and the ones he made with big stars in a way have lasted more throughout the decades than the ones that don't. Like one of his great films of the early 40s is called Foreign Correspondent, which got a Best Picture nomination at the Oscars the same year as Rebecca. But a lot of people outside of like cinephiles and Hitchcock scholars, like most people don't know Foreign Correspondent, even though it's a great movie, because it doesn't have stars in it. Like the two leads of that film are not really known today. I can't even think of their names off the top of my head. I'd have to look them up. Whereas like Rebecca made the same year, similarly great movie, but that has Laurence Olivier, it has Joan Fontaine, and stars that are still to this day very well known. So those movies last more than the ones that don't have any stars. So again, I do think it was bold for Zinnemann to not. Can you imagine this movie with Jack Nicholson? That's the Jackal.
Oh my God.
I can't even imagine it. Like he's so like
yeah.
the Jackal character is supposed to be someone who can kind of like move in between different disguises. And he's very stoic and he can like be, this guy for this woman, this guy for this man, as we get to later in the movie. And I'm
Jack
like,
Nicholson's whole thing is like his whole thing is, he's gonna play different characters, but he's Jack Nicholson.
Yeah,
And
I mean,
he's gonna give that.
I'd have to think about it. I think there were a couple stars in the early 70s, male stars, who might have been right for this role, but like Nicholson and Redford would have been super distracting. Although Redford has, he did a couple like political thrillers. He did that one, 3 Days of the Condor with Faye Dunaway in 1975. And that's I think a little bit more of like a not typical thriller because it's really good, but it has a little bit more of that kind of genre element to it than The Day of the Jackal. But this is a very specific kind of character, and I do think it would have been distracting with a star. And I think it makes sense that we would have someone like Edward Fox, who the audience doesn't really know very well. And
I mean,
so
even
you don't
just
really know
the
if you're like, am I supposed to root for this guy? Am I like, is he the villain? Like, he's
Mhm.
kind of the lead of the movie, but he's doing bad things and he wants to assassinate a president. So you're like, well, I'm not really rooting for him, but he's kind of like our eyes of the movie. He's like who we follow. So that was interesting
that's
too.
that's exactly the point. One of the points I wanted to bring up was, this man is a criminal. He is a
Yeah,
murderer. He is a contract killer. And I found myself, this is going to sound bad. I found myself
rooting for him.
actively rooting for him.
Your main criticism of the film is him not killing the guy. You were like,
I'm
oh,
not
give me
gonna
a break.
I'm not gonna lie to you, there's some truth in that. Because he was so dedicated. I don't know if
Yeah.
I've ever seen such a dedicated, intelligent, just cunning, well strategized, disciplined
Mm-hmm.
criminal anti-hero character that I wanted him to be successful.
You wanted this to end with a shot to the head and him whistling,
Listen,
walking down
I
the
don't have anything
stairs.
against
Roll
Charles de
credits.
Gaulle. If there's any Charles de Gaulle historians out there, I'm sorry. But,
Our listeners
you
are
know,
like, so Brian's guest today is a proponent of assassination.
pro assassination.
You're like, you know
No,
what?
I
He was
mean,
the hero.
it was just, I think
But
in all seriousness, I think it's just a testament to the characterization of this
yeah,
character
really strong.
and really strong. And, his sort of silent sleuth persona where
Mhm.
he was able to sort of slimily wiggle his way out of the tight scenarios he finds himself in. Even when his back's up against the wall, LaBelle is narrowing in on him. He has him even like cornered, supposedly in
Yeah.
a hotel or something, and he wiggles his way out and he figures out. And it's not even like he is adapting on the fly to some extent. It's a combination of adapting on the fly, knowing what his next move is every split second of any thing that goes wrong. He's well able to adapt in that way, but he's also a lot of the things that he in the way that he works his way out of were things that he planned in advance. He had the multiple identities secured. He had the multiple papers and passports and all of these outfits. He had the chestnut hair. He had the gray hair. All of
Mhm.
these things were things that he bought, he planned, and he orchestrated in the first act. And
Right.
we slowly, one by one, you realize how all of these things were going to compile together into ultimately landing him toward his goal.
Mhm.
And it's just a sort of relentless, and it's not even the relentlessness of his approach, but even just the craftiness of it and the
Mm.
well strategized. I'm very much like, I love like strategy. This is a total like diversion, but I love like strategy board games or like
Oh,
strategy
okay.
sort of games
Oh,
when
you're like,
when
yeah.
you got to like constantly think 10 steps ahead, like where things are going. And this was like a strategy puzzle game for me. And I just loved watching him play it so well.
See, I don't like those kind of games.
Oh, well, this explains everything, Brian. This
I
explains this
like
whole podcast.
Donkey Kong Country for the SNES. I like just the simple side scroller. You beat the bad guy, you go through you know, through the hole at the end and on to the next level. You
I
played
think our
Donkey Kong
video
Country, right?
Oh, yes. Yeah, of course. I think our video game preferences have said our whole story about our reaction to this movie.
No, you know what this movie reminded me of as I was watching, especially the first hour? It reminded me of Alfred Hitchcock's Topaz, which is like this really kind of slow, talky, late 60s movie he did without any real thrills, without any stars. And it's like a lot of kind of like laborious, like boardroom scenes, 10 men around a table. Let's talk about things for a
Mm,
scene. And then we'll go to a scene with a woman, and then we'll go back to the men around the table. And I'm like,
yeah. Well,
no,
that does happen here
it was
too.
kind of giving me that vibe for a while. And once we were spending more time with the Jackal, his mission coming into focus, I felt like the movie definitely got stronger as it went on. And I mean, there's a lot of interesting things happening in this movie. It plays with homoeroticism a lot in the movie. There's this one
It
scene where he's
does.
full
Yeah.
on naked, like walking through the dark and like full on naked. And I'm like, thank you, Fred Zinnemann. And then we get to a scene,
The Turkish bath.
the Turkish bath later, and he like hooks up with this guy who sees him on television and goes home. And he like went to the market or something. He's like,
Yeah, he got a lobster.
yeah, he gets a live lobster. He says, turn on the TV. You're on the TV, honey. and he goes into the kitchen, and it's one of the few moments in the movie that felt like kind of like a deliberate, like kind of filmmaking choice of like, let's have a little bit of style here by letting the camera kind of pan backwards as this gay man is being killed in the kitchen off screen. Again, it's not Brian De Palma, like, let's show a close-up of this Dress to Kill kind of thing. It's very just kind of quiet and restrained. But I did find that moment really chilling, like his death scene off camera kind of in the kitchen. I thought that was done really well. But that was an interesting component to the movie too. Like dealing with those themes in a film that you would not expect that to be a part of this story at all.
That's very true. I think the story does have a lot of layers to it. One layer that I actually do wish maybe had a little bit more nuance to it was, you sort of alluded to it a little bit with like talking men, and then we cut to a scene with a woman, and then we're back to the talking men.
Yes.
There is like two female characters in the movie that do have some sort of play on in the story. We have the
Denise is one
spy, and then his relationship that he has with this woman that he meets at the hotel, who ultimately becomes sort of the witness to it all kind of unfolding toward the end. And yeah, I will definitely say that was one critique, I think, in the way that those characters play out, and that they did sort of fall into that trajectory of the man's gonna meet this woman, and that's gonna be his downfall or whatever. Like he's gonna fall in love as a sort of a distraction from his main goal, and that woman's not going to be thoroughly characterized, but she's going to serve to sort of take away this man from his mission. That's the driving force of the plot. And so I do think that the for as much time as this movie has to explore character, I do wish its female counterparts could have played more integral roles in sort of defining the story a little bit more. That's definitely one thing I would point out.
Yeah, I'm very interested in stories about women, and when I'm watching a movie that's mostly male centered and we get like one or two kind of side female characters that don't have a whole lot to do with the story, I also check out a little bit there too. I like, even in a movie like this, like I want one like really strong female character somewhere.
Right.
Like have her play a role at the end, like have her be a part of this. And the movie doesn't really give you that, but one of my favorite films of all time is 12 Angry Men. So take with that what you will. That's a movie with no women at all. So, but that's like specific because, it's 1957. So of course only men could be be the jurors there.
Right.
But yeah,
right.
I struggle some of these early 70s titles where it's just all about the man all the way to the end. It's like, okay, let's let's tell a female story here somewhere. But
like, can you imagine like if the Jackal was like a cunning sleuth woman? Like that would be a killer movie too.
Oh
like,
my gosh.
Who could we recast as the female lead of The Day of the Jackal?
I'm trying to think like who would have been a great choice in 73 to play the Jackal, and it was a woman. Right. Like I feel like I'd probably cast Ellen Burstyn. Ellen Burstyn would be my choice from The Exorcist and Alice Doesn't Live Here Anymore. She would have been
pretty good.
She would have been good. Faye Dunaway. Faye Dunaway would have been good. I mean, there's a lot. Glenda Jackson, she's a great actress of that era. Like she would have been good in this. I actually, that's interesting because at the end, I always ask the guests, like, how would they do this now? I do think like a woman being the Jackal would make it really interesting.
Well, I'm picturing like Jodie Foster type character.
Jodie Foster, not in 1973. She was like, 6.
Not in 73, but yeah.
We just talked about a 1973 Jodie Foster film called Tom Sawyer, where she plays Becky. and she's like 7. She has her first kiss scene in a movie. She kisses Tom Sawyer, and she's like, "Yeah." She's like 6. But yeah, I mean, well, let's see what else about this film. I mean, you want to talk about the end, just like your frustrations with. I mean, here's what I loved about the ending, because you watch this
Okay,
movie
yeah. You take
for
it away
2
here.
hours and 20 minutes, and it's all to get this guy to this position in this apartment building to shoot this president of France, right? And he gets all set up. He judo chops old woman. He gets ready,
And she's
and
okay,
then
though. She's okay.
and then he takes a shot, right? And it misses his head again. Doesn't he take a shot? But
He
two
does.
two
Yeah.
men below, do they work with the president, or they're like I could never quite understand what everybody's job was, but they were like I mean,
Yeah.
they were kind of security, right? Like they were
The two
trying to
people that
protect
ultimately like
that
capture him,
that
like who were
capture him.
they?
That like
Yeah,
yeah,
one
those
was
two
just
men.
like sort of anonymous security or like
Right.
police force or something, and then the other was the main commissioner
The main
detective.
commissioner detective guy. He's the only actor from the film that I recognized. His
Oh,
name is
okay.
Michael Lonsdale. He is the villain of Moonraker. Every time he was on camera in The Day of the Jackal, I was thinking Roger Moore, Moonraker, because he does still kind of look the same, even it's what, 6 years before he does Moonraker. But yeah, he's the guy who eventually takes down the Jackal. But like
Right.
everything the Jackal has done, I mean, he has like put himself through what, 3 or 4 different disguises, different hair, and then he like gets to where he needs to go by faking that he has one leg, right? And he's like, I need to get through. And the security guy's like, let me see your identification. And it's the whole thing. And he gets through. He's faking that he has one leg. He gets all the way up there. He takes that woman down. He gets all set up. He takes a shot at the president. It misses his head barely again, right? Doesn't it show like the bullet hit the ground, like just to the right of his
Yes,
head?
you can see it like kind of shoot past and hit off the ground.
And then the 2 guys bust into the room. Does the Jackal shoot one of the men?
He had loaded the next bullet, which that gun can only take one bullet, which was
Yeah.
ultimately his downfall, which is pretty funny.
Yeah.
So he uses that bullet to takes out the first guy.
He takes out the first guy. The second guy, the commissioner detective,
takes his gun, the guy who just died.
Yeah, and just starts firing. And the last
and
shot
launches.
And as the Jackal is reloading, right? He's like moving the gun. He's like what, 1 to 2 seconds away from shooting the second guy, and the commissioner just starts firing. And the last shot of Edward Fox as the Jackal is him just being like blown into the air, up against the wall, down, and that's the last time you see him. I mean, he's like 2 seconds away from shooting down the second guy, and probably then would have had a chance to shoot dead the president. Like 2 seconds. Right. And the commissioner just like scrambles, grabs the gun, goes like this, and blasts the Jackal away. And then we don't get like a lingering close up of Edward Fox like dead on the ground. He like boom, blasted against the wall, out of frame. We never see him again. And it's just like, so like, I loved just how immediate it was. And Zinnemann's like, nope, we're not giving this character any sort of send off. That's it. We're done. Like, I kind of like that. That was surprising to me.
I'll admit, I do, as you're sort of describing it, I do like the poetics of the lack of poetics, I guess, with the character, and in the way that it's so, everything is so deliberate and so intensely strategized and planned and organized on both parts, and then all of a sudden you have boom, it's over in
very quick
split seconds. And there is something to be said about that just heightened abrupt shift in tone, or not even shift in tone, but like shift in the speed of how things play out, I guess. And yeah, I do think there certainly is something in that. I think as I was watching it, it did shock me a bit, because I was so into the deliberacy of everything that had been going on, and I was into that pace of the pace of play, if you will, behind everythything that was going on, sort of behind the scenes, and the high level confidentiality of it all, and these cobwebs of contacting every consulate and and police commissioner in the Western hemisphere. You know, all of the dynamics of all of that I found very intriguing and captivating, and so it was almost like this heightened quick bolt of lightning at the end sort of took me by surprise and felt out of character with
Of the
how the
movie.
rest of everything played out, that I was a little bit shocked by it. Maybe upon like sort of revisiting it, I would sort of I could potentially lean more into how you're reading that with, you know, the abrupt shift is sort of like this just ironic moment in a way, in comparison to how everything else plays out. I can totally read it like that. I can see that. But for me, I think in that moment, it was a bit of a shock.
How pissed do you think the Jackal is as he's hitting the wall?
Unimaginably, unsalvageably,
His last thought,
unrectifyingly pissed.
the last thought he has before everything goes black is like, "Are you effing kidding me?"
And I felt every bit of that with him.
You can almost see like the frustration on his face as he hits the wall. He's like, "Ugh."
You know, as it happened, I think I like flew back, hit the wall, and said, "You kidding me? We've come this far?"
Yeah. And that was I was like, I was surprised that Zinnemann chose to do it like that. He could have had it be much more simple and just like, you know, he could have just been shot in the head or something and hit the ground. But like the decision to have him like fly up into the air like that was kind of interesting.
Like there was very little in terms of theatrics.
There's no theatrics in the whole movie.
Yeah, exactly. Like even you mentioned some of the kills are even off screen or they're very simple. It's also the casualness of the way he kills. You know, he knocks out the passport guy. He like knocks him out, like punches him a couple times, and then just casually locks him in a chest under some shelves. And I was like, that was literally horrifying. Because to my impression, he was still potentially alive. Like maybe he was dead. Like that would be a little less brutal, but it only felt like he punched him a couple of times and kind of knocked him out, which makes that scene incredibly brutal and in a very casual tone because he just locked him in a box.
Yeah. Oh, he has like no emotion, no feelings of any kind.
It's just that complete lack of theatrics, lack of over the top emotion, anything like that exists with this character, and then all of a sudden he's like blown away like a sort of stylized action epic in a way.
Like something you'd see in a stylish action film with like a bad guy at the end who we've hated for 90 minutes, like just gets blown away. You know, that moment you're waiting for. It actually reminded me of have you seen A Simple Plan with Bill Paxton and Billy Bob Thornton from the late 90s?
Yes.
There's that wife who gets shot. She gets shot and she flies across the kitchen and hits the wall. That's the part it reminded me of. Isn't she like running at Bill Paxton or something and he fires and she goes when she just like flies across the kitchen?
It's like a Wes Craven scream kill.
Yeah. But then, okay, so I like that moment. I was like, okay, movie. Like you've like really
you've worked me after 140 minutes.
After 2 hours of drudgery. I'm into this. No, I liked a lot of this. But then it's like, okay, if you're gonna make your movie 2 hours and 23 minutes, like you need to end on a really satisfying note. It ends with them like burying the body of the Jackal, and then the credits just start. Like this movie doesn't really have an ending. That's just like issue. They go, it's like Zinnemann sitting there with the editor 6 months later. He's like, oh crap, we never shot a last scene. Well, hold on. Didn't we get the footage? Don't we have that shot where they're like burying the body? That was going to be part of that let's just end with that. So okay, we'll pull up that scene, and let's just throw the credits on there. It doesn't feel satisfying. Like if you're going to have your movie be 2 hours plus, you need to have a really great final moment, like a button on the film. And it ends like there's no thought has been put into how we let this story conclude. And that bothered me.
I'm going to second you 110% here on that one, because I completely agree. I think and that's another thing that caught me by surprise too, because, you know, if I could like sum up sort of the tone, the feel that this movie gave me in terms of its its production, it would be calculated. Everything felt so calculated in the characters' actions and the way that Zinnemann directed and produced this. And that just felt so uncalculated, almost undisciplined, almost
Yeah.
just like we went through all this and then you chopped off a like studio like cut off a scene at the end or something. It
You had enough
felt very
room.
unresolved.
If you have enough room to get to 223, then you can get to 226.
226, 228 should it would have done this movie wonders.
By the way, I have to say this. Speaking of the running time of this movie, on IMDb, this user poll is making me laugh. Someone did a user poll that says celebrating 2023 with 23 2-hour and 23-minute movies. And The Day of the Jackal is one of the 23 films.
That's incredibly specific.
Apparently another one is Pirates of the Caribbean, the first one. That's, you know, I'm a film nerd. I go into some really crazy topics and aspects of Oscar history and this and that. I look at films released 50 years ago. I don't think I would ever thought to talk about 23 films in 2023 that ran 2 hours and 23 minutes. That would have not.
That feels niche. That's niche.
Very niche. That should be my next podcast.
Wait, okay. Next question though. Do you think they do it every year? Like, do you?
I mean, I did make a video. I made a video. Everyone was making a top 10 of 2022 video, and I did top 22 of 2022.
I do that too. Yeah. Last year I published 22 of 22. I didn't actually publish it this year, but I would have done 23 of 20. Yeah, I do kind of like that idea.
Because every year I make a top 20, I make my top 10 list 1 through 10, and then I do number 11 through 20 alphabetical. That's how I've done it since I was like high school, early college. And I think for college, that's how I had to do the top 10 list, and I started doing it that way, and then I've done that ever since. So I'm like, well, I have my top 20. I had it written out. I just got to pick 2 more, and then I'll do that.
Yeah.
But 23, I'm not a big fan of the number. You know, there's that Jim Carrey movie. It made me kind of feel weird about the number 23. So I think for this year, it'll be top 10 again, but we'll see.
We're in a good territory of the millennium where that's possible. Like if we were in like 20
top 97,
that might be a little problematic.
If we're in like 2097, and I'm Brian's latest YouTube video, 97 greatest movies of 2097.
Brian's binge watching movies at the end of the year just to fill out his list.
I did that on Letterboxd around early February. I had seen 90 films released in 2022, and I said, okay, before the Oscars on March 12th, we got to make it 100. Like, we're gonna get to 100. And so I had a list of like 17 movies I still hadn't gotten to. Once I got to movie 100, I just like, then I didn't watch the other ones. I was like, I did it. I hit 100. I'm good. I can stop it here. But so
I'm trying to think of how many I got to.
Did you get to 100? And then I have friends that are like, oh, I
there.
saw. And then my friend Cody, he's like, oh, I got to 160. I'm like, good for you.
I got to 93.
Oh man, doesn't that just hurt?
That was my narrative list. I also know for a fact I watched 6 documentaries, so that puts me at 99.
99. That's more depressing than if you had seen like 10. To get all the way to 99.
I am actually a little upset that I know that fact now, because I could have, if I
probably
didn't look
saw
up,
one more. Something. You could like throw in like a Dateline or something.
I might have to go now. I got to go watch one tonight, Brian.
It's like there's still time. It's like the author Sue Grafton, who wrote a mystery series for every book was a letter of the alphabet. The first one's called A is for Alibi. I believe she published that in like 1982, because I read the first 5 when I was younger. And then from the late 80s to the late 2010s, she wrote a book for every letter. She wrote Y. Y is for Yesterday, I think is the title. She got cancer. and she died. And she never
No.
wrote. She never wrote Z.
Oh, I can't believe you just told me that. How am I gonna sleep at
And
night knowing
when she
that fact?
died, her family came out and said, for us, for Sue, for the world of this mystery series, the alphabet ends with Y. And I'm like, oh, that that's tough. Like to get that
That's
close.
really
Like ever
tough.
one, I'm like,
That's
she
really
doesn't
tough.
have like a secret Z manuscript stashed
So
in a basement somewhere.
did her family say anything about what like what was the word gonna be in the title?
No, like I think they were approached. Like, was she like drafting it? Like, did she write any chapters? And they said that I think I read in some article they said no, she got too sick and she wasn't able to
Oh,
start working on the last one. Now,
I'm gonna be thinking about this for a while.
to be fair, her series was not like it wasn't like on a trajectory of like a long story that necessarily ended with Z. I was
Okay.
she did say to people, she said Z, like the Z book is not going to be the big finale. It's just going to be
Mm.
another mystery and it's just going to end. She said that, I believe, in interviews, that it wasn't like everything's led to this. It wasn't like that kind of a book. It was just another story. Like maybe she'd have something at the end that was kind of like a finale, but so
It's
there's
like
that.
Kevin
But
Feige was just like he built everything up and he's like, Endgame, nah,
it'd
we
be,
don't have to
yeah,
do that.
it'd be like if Endgame got all the way to Iron Man looking up and saying, I am Iron Man, roll credits. You'd be like, what? But how did we get on this? I don't remember how this came.
No idea. No clue.
Oh, was it just like talking about how like the end is so just kind of like the movie's
Yeah,
been
okay.
building?
The end was just unresolved. Yeah.
I can't
There's
remember
a
how we got on
couple
that. But
there's a couple details of this movie I wanna bring up to you that I really appreciated.
okay, yeah.
One of them is another one of those little strategy items that get placed early and have later payoffs. And I think the one that has the longest span of duration between first appearance of the prop and payoff of the prop is he goes to like a street side flea market type of thing or something and gets those little medals
Oh, right.
that are supposed to be like maybe like veterans significance or something along those lines. And we don't see this ever again until his last disguise and identity change. I thought that was a really interesting detail. And then the other thing I want to point out is what a firearm that this man had built. Very
Oh, yeah.
fascinating gun. I don't know how it operates. I don't know. I mean, I'm not very in tune with gun mechanisms, but there wasn't a whole lot to this.
Oh,
Just
yeah.
a few pieces of metal and some explosive bullets. I don't know how that works, but
Yeah, I don't know whose job is it on a movie to make sure all of that is authentic and technically correct. And like some of these scenes, I'm like if I were directing this, I wouldn't really know like how this all works, how you put the gun together, and all the different kinds of weapons. Like it's Fred Zinnemann just trusting in someone on set to know all of that stuff. Like in terms of how this shot's going to go off versus the shot from this gun, and that would be kind of complicated for me if I was making a movie like that.
but the way he stores it is so interesting. Like he puts it in the car pipe
Yeah.
that gets it across the border, and then my mind literally broke when he pulled it out of the crutch.
Oh, yeah. Mm-hmm.
That was cool. Like,
Mm-hmm.
and he had to have planned that from the beginning because he bought the medal early on, so he knew that his last outfit was gonna be a sort of a veteran that might be have like a sort of more homeless appearance to like get him by security in some way without anyone asking too many questions. Like he knew that he had to fit it in the crutch. He like all that's I don't know. The strategy on that was just I could talk about this man's I'm just praising this criminal like it's my job at this point.
You're gonna start a fan club.
I the Jackal fan club. Anyone out
Who
there
here
listening, if
has
you want to sign
seen
up,
Dave
contact
the
me.
Jackal?
I want a whole Bond universe surrounding the Jackal. I mean, he died, but
Right. He does die at the end. Spoiler alert.
so that does make a franchise a little tricky, but you know,
You're
John Wick's
like,
still alive, so I mean, come
you're
on.
like, did Zinnemann shoot an alternate version of that moment? Is the footage available?
Is there an alternate ending that can
You
lead to
wanted
some
you
fan
wanted Day
fiction
of the
surrounding the
Jackal.
Jackal?
You wanted Day of the Jackal Part 4, the final chapter. You wanted like a
Yes,
franchise.
I'm gonna turn this into a whole fan fiction about the Jackal, and we're gonna have a whole universe.
Would the
You
second film be the Night of the Jackal?
maybe, maybe, yeah. I kind of like
I
that.
don't
Do
think
you
the
do you
Day
want
of the
copyright on
Jackal.
that?
I don't think the Day of the Jackal 2 sounds very good. That's kind of like a lot.
Yeah, it's
But if
got
you were to
you
do a
gotta
franchise, you'd have to have like the afternoon of the Jackal, the night of the Jackal, the early morning, the
the
midday,
mid afternoon.
the midday snack of the Jackal, noontime,
We got to
the
start pulling out
the
like a
brunch
Hobbit's
of the
eating
Jackal.
schedule. Oh, the brunch. Oh, now we're getting somewhere.
That's movie 7. That's everyone considers that
We
the
did this
best
with
sequel.
Scarecrow too. We planned
Plan
sequels for a film. So
No, remember the
that's
director of Scarecrow wanted to make a second one in like
yeah, okay.
2014.
And then we wrote it, right? Like
And then we
we
wrote the
came up with
script.
yeah, okay. So maybe that's our thing now.
Which that remember that cracked me up because Gene Hackman retired from films in 2004.
Yes. Yes.
10 years later, like he hired someone to write a script for the second one that featured the character that Gene Hackman played in the like and then the thing on what was it on IMDb or something that said like he later decided to abandon the project realizing that Gene Hackman was retired. Like maybe before you hired someone to write the script you could have thought about that.
Yeah, that's gonna be me. I'm gonna write the Night of the Jackal, the sequel, and then after I go through I get a studio on board. And I'm like, wait, the Jackal died. That's
Yeah,
problematic for the
but
script.
but he can come back as a ghost.
You know, I don't doubt that he actually was. That was all a decoy Jackal. He was
Yeah,
that well strategized.
that was a
it decoy
disguised
that died.
Jackal.
Yeah.
The real
The
Jackal
script is writing itself at this
is
point.
still here. And Edward Fox, I believe, is still with us, right? His last project was 2018, but he could come back. Just come up with a really good premise, hook him in. And
He might be a little old for the stunts of this movie, but he was born in 1937, so
he still got it. Harrison Ford is Indiana Jones, and he's what 80.
That's fair. We'll see how well he does.
He's back for more Indy. But yeah, I mean, I feel like, and I say this all the time, I really struggle if a movie is more than 2 hours, it has to really, really work for me. It has to draw me in. It has to really earn that running time. And for me, I felt like there were chunks of the film that were kind of slow, and I was like, okay, let's get to it, movie. What's next?
That's fair. That's fair.
I can't imagine I'm alone in that assessment because from what I read, a lot of
Based on
the
box
critics,
office, I would imagine you're probably not alone.
I mean, a lot of the critics really love this. You know, my fave, Mr. Roger Ebert, he gave it 4 stars.
Yes,
He said, I wasn't prepared for how good it is. It's not just a suspense classic. It's a beautifully executed example of filmmaking. It's put together like a fine watch. The screenplay meticulously assembles an incredible array of material, and Zinnemann choreographs it so that the story, complicated as it is, unfolds in almost documentary starkness. That's a great way to put it. Like I get what he's coming from here. I don't know if I watched the exact same movie, but I understand where he's coming from. And you also have to think like what movies were like in 1973. Like movies of this caliber and this genre, like you didn't really see anything like The Day of the Jackal around this time. Like thrillers would be kind of B movies that didn't really give you much. They were kind of like junk food. Like you didn't see genre films at this level really very much in 73. You know, we're still not to The Exorcist yet. We're not to Jaws yet. And I mean, we had Deliverance in the summer of 72. That's a great thriller, really suspenseful, but maybe 1 to 2 a year. Like you don't see much in this kind of a film. So I'm sure like, you know, you're a, you know, day in and day out film critic. You're seeing everything. This movie probably would hold your attention more than a lot of the other titles at the time. Especially this is early in the year. This is not like a late year, end of the year December awards buzzy release. This is like May. So I'm sure a lot of the critics really took to it at the time. The movie grossed 16 million at the box office. It did well. Like it earned I think it made its money back. I mean, that's pretty good for 73 for a movie like this.
Yeah,
It
16
probably could have
million in
done
73 can be,
better with a
yeah,
star, but
with a
it did
star.
pretty
Yeah.
well.
You get Jack Nicholson in there, you got a $50 million box office.
I would have so I'd never seen this movie before. I would have definitely seen this years ago. if Nicholson was in the movie, I would have been
Right.
intrigued.
Well, that's the thing about, attaching star, or I mean, in the moment you might not even know who the star is, but like if a star develops from the movie, that's an easy in for someone to go back to. If I'm gonna go back to an older movie, a lot of times it's because I want to, finish someone's filmography, or I saw something more recent of theirs. I want to go back to seeing something they did earlier in their career. So that's an easier in for sure to go back to something if you're familiar with a name.
Yeah. And Zinnemann said he was pleased with the film's reception at the box office. I guess in 1993, he said, the idea that excited me about this movie was to make a suspense film where everybody knew the end, that de Gaulle was not killed. In spite of knowing the end, would the audience sit still? It turned out that they did, just as the readers of the book did. I don't think we mentioned that, right? It's based on a
We
novel.
did not mention this is based on a novel, yeah.
Which was what, like in the end of the 60s? I think it's the same title, right? I think it's like a late 60s novel that then was turned into a film a few years later. Was it Kevin Ross wrote the book, I think? Let me see.
Yeah, it looks like they
It's a
credited
screenplay.
Kenneth Ross as a writer. So was he maybe the novel?
Yeah, let me just make sure I get that right. I don't want to give wrong information. Because I did read that it was based on a book, and then okay, so yeah, it's Frederick Forsyth, the other guy. I guess he might have collaborated on the script. So the novel came out in 1971 by English author Frederick Forsyth. The novel is historical fiction. The OAS, as described, did exist, and the book opens with an accurate depiction of the attempt to assassinate de Gaulle.
Yeah, I think that's what I read.
Yeah, and then the rest of it is fiction. So the book came out 2 years before the movie. So this is probably a hot property.
So they turned it around pretty quick.
Yeah. So yeah, if a book comes out and the movie's released 2 years later, that means like they got the ball rolling pretty fast.
Yeah, they optioned the rights to that like almost immediately.
Yeah. Let's talk about a couple other things. The film received 1 Oscar nomination for Best Film Editing. That was at the early 1974 ceremony. The other nominees were American Graffiti, Jonathan Livingston Seagull, The Exorcist, and The Sting, which won. So I'm always intrigued. I don't know how much like into the Oscars you are. I'm always intrigued by these one-off nominations in a technical category. It's like everybody decided The Day of the Jackal is not good enough to get in a picture, or director, or screenplay. No acting nominations, but we'll just give it the lone film editing nomination. So for the rest of time, it is now an Oscar-nominated film. If you had to give this movie 1 Oscar nomination, is that what you give it? Film editing?
If I had to give it 1, I do love the editing. I'm not gonna lie.
Yeah,
that would be up there. I think I would start with adapted screenplay, though.
Adapted screenplay. That's the category that for me feels more appropriate. That's what I was thinking too.
Yeah,
it's so much about the script.
As far as one-off nominations, editing can't be common.
Yeah, I want to say it happens here and there. It happens with like if there's a movie that like it's okay, it's well liked, but we don't want to give it a bunch of nominations. It might show up. Usually the one-off nominations are visual effects or sound, like for like Marvel films or like like summer blockbusters kind of movies. Those will get into like visual effects and nothing else. Makeup's a big one. Makeup and hairstyling, you'll see a movie get into like that category and nothing else because it just has amazing makeup effects or something.
Costume, something like
But
Mrs. Harris Goes to Paris.
Mrs. Harris Goes to Paris, perfect example, best costume design. We'll get a one-off Mrs. Harris Goes to Paris just because that movie is all about the costumes.
Right.
But I think you're right. I think especially in recent years, film editing usually goes to movies that are in Best Picture and Best Director.
Best Picture contenders. Yep.
They're like, I think I looked it up for an article I wrote for Gold Derby in the last few months. Like in the last 15 years, it's like I think 2 films in the last 15 years has won Best Editing without a Best Picture nomination. Like usually editing goes with picture, especially for the winner. So
yeah, right.
But
it's a good build up to picture, I think, especially of late.
Yeah, but this did get 7 BAFTA nominations. We should mention, like the British Academy Awards.
Oh, the British loved it.
They loved it. It got nominated for Best Picture and Best Director, and it won Best Editing. So that I don't know, like if that happened first and then
it could have
the
been
Oscars followed.
Yeah.
But going back to the 70s, sometimes it's not clear like what comes first. Usually the Golden Globes are always first, no matter what year you're talking about. But sometimes BAFTA would come after the Oscars. But so yeah, the editing was definitely noticed, and it won at BAFTA and it got nominated at the Oscars. The Sting won Best Editing at the Oscars. The Sting wins like everything that year.
No, I'm not going to get mad at that.
Which we'll get to.
Movie.
But the editing in The Exorcist is fantastic. So I wouldn't. That might be my choice is The Exorcist.
One thing I want to point out: one of the nominees for BAFTA, it was nominated for Best Soundtrack.
What? I didn't see that.
What does that mean? What was soundtrack in this? Was there something I missed?
Like I felt like there was no soundtrack. So what are we talking about?
That's what I'm saying.
Is there some sort of like is there a sealed CD somewhere, music inspired by the motion picture we don't know about? That would be, if it was music from the movie, that'd be a very brief soundtrack. 1999, it's exactly 4 minutes of music. Okay, thank you. Like, is there even music over the end credits? Like, as he's walking away and the credits are rolling?
I don't even think
there's music there. Like, I could see audiences sitting there, they're like, is it over? I guess the titles on the screen tell me it's time to leave. It also got 3 Golden Globe nominations, including Best Motion Picture Drama. So it did pretty well. It kind of surprises me the amount of critical notices for this. People seem to really like it. It did fairly well. And it gets in at both Golden Globes and BAFTA in Best Picture, that the Oscars were kind of like, no. We'll give it the lone film editing, but nothing else. Like for a movie this well reviewed, like I'm kind of surprised. Maybe it was tough to get into Best Picture, but why didn't it make it into screenplay? Like that's surprising to me.
That's surprising, yeah. It's a screenplay.
So
I can see where it doesn't get a lot of performance attention because there weren't a lot of big names attached here.
Yeah,
but screenplay seems like an ideal destination for this one.
Now, if a big star had played the Jackal, would they have gotten into Best Actor? I don't think so. It's too like quiet of a character. There's not big like emotional beats or dramatic moments. Like I don't think that performance ever would have gotten in. But also we had a remake, kind of a remake in '97. Are you familiar at all with the Jackal starring?
I heard about
Richard Gere and Bruce Willis. I saw it in a theater.
Wow.
13-year-old me went to see the Jackal, and my memory is it wasn't very interesting. That's my memory. I never saw it again. Sidney Poitier is in it too, like the famous Sidney Poitier has a supporting role. And what I found, I was like, is it just like a straight remake of this? Like I can't remember. And then I looked it up and it said, so the 97 film is about an assassin nicknamed the Jackal who wants to assassinate a significant target. But other than that, it has little to do with the original story, Day of the Jackal. The novelist, Frederick Forsyth, refused to allow his name to be used in connection with the movie. And director Fred Zinnemann fought with the studio to ensure that the new film did not share his film's title. He did not want the 97 movie to be called The Day of the Jackal. He wanted it to be separate, which, I mean, Fred Zinnemann is fighting this. Fred Zinnemann is dead in early 97, like 6 months before the movie comes out. So the last thing Fred Zinnemann did before he died was fight the studio and said, don't you dare use the title of my movie, The Day of the Jackal. And then he called it quits.
Some
Right?
real beef surrounding the ending life of this movie. I
Like,
didn't see that coming.
Like, I think I read he died in like March or April of 97, and then the film comes out in November of 97. So they would have shot this in like the fall of 96, early 97. So that was like the last big project Fred Zinnemann took on. And then I just read here on Wikipedia, it says on the Wikipedia page for the 71 novel, it says, so there was the Jackal in 97. And then it says Peacock has ordered a TV series adaptation of the novel, produced by Carnival Films, with Ronan Bennett as showrunner and Brian Kirk as director. And it says here Eddie Redmayne is going to play the Jackal. Have you heard of this?
I have not
Like,
heard
I
of
just
this.
stumbled on this in like a minute ago. I went, what? Let me just like, is this a thing? Is this like happening, or is this just like
Wow.
being rumored? Eddie Redmayne, the Jackal, because that's interesting. I like that casting. I like Eddie Redmayne.
I don't mind.
Oh
that.
my god,
Yeah, is real.
It's March 21st, 2023. Eddie Redmayne.
This just happened.
Yeah, we're recording this on April 18th, so about a month ago. I didn't even see this story a month ago.
No, I hadn't seen this either.
Eddie Redmayne to lead The Day of the Jackal at Peacock. Redmayne has been cast. It says at the end, we are excited to bring to life a reimagining of Forsyth's revered thriller in the complex world in which we live today. We are incredibly fortunate to have an actor of Eddie's caliber as our Jackal. Paired with the screenplay and direction, this is a first-class creative team. So, yeah, this probably will be a 2024 limited series on Peacock. Isn't that interesting?
How about that?
We talk about this all the time. What would they do if they remade this 50 years later? Occasionally it happens. We actually get to find out because they're going to make one this
50
year.
years later. Wow, how about that?
See the influence I have? This would never have happened, Danny, without Film at 50. I keep these things alive.
If this starts happening frequently, I'm gonna think that you have got something up your sleeve out there in Hollywood.
Yeah, if in 2024 suddenly like every single movie that came out in 1973 is like being remade, you'll be like, what? It's like, oh, Film at 50 podcast. It's inspiring us.
Every director like that doesn't want their 73 movie remade is like clamoring to shut down your podcast.
Yeah, they're gonna be fighting not the studio, but they're gonna fight me.
Yeah,
directors in the early 90s that are like, god damn it, like stop.
A bunch of old white men coming knocking down your door saying don't review my film, so it'll be turned into a miniseries.
They're going to take my beloved book, my beloved old film, and they're going to make it into a limited series on Peacock. But will you watch that?
Now I feel compelled to, honestly. And I feel like Eddie Redmayne might tap into his like good nurse side.
That was a great performance. Yeah.
You know, like people will like meme on the like, you know, what is that scene? Like, I can't.
What does he say it like for 30 seconds straight?
Yeah. But I actually do like his performance in that. I found him pretty bone chilling. So
he was creepy.
To tap into that, maybe there could be something there for this character. I could see it.
I can totally see Eddie Redmayne in that role. Like he's actually good casting for that. Like maybe like a little young, but it'll be a different way to present the story. Isn't he like early 30s, mid 30s? I think he's younger than
41.
Me. What?
Yeah.
Eddie Redmayne is 41?
He's 41. Yeah.
No kidding. Wow. Well, I guess, okay, he did win his Oscar for The Theory of Everything in 2015. That was 8 years ago.
8 years.
And the youngest person to ever win Best Actor is Adrian Brody, who was 29 when he won for The Pianist. So if he's 41, that would have made him 33 at the time. So that makes sense. Yeah. Yeah, no, he couldn't be early 30s. That would have put him at like 22 when he shot that. So yeah, that makes sense. But he always feels very young to me. Like in The Good Nurse, he felt
Yeah, I
young.
agree. He does feel young in that. Yeah.
Like he looks like he's 30 in The Good Nurse. He does not feel like he's 40. But so yeah, that's coming on Peacock. I mean, it feels like if they've started it, they just started shooting. So
So we
probably
probably
wouldn't.
won't get it for a while.
Probably would be spring, summer. I would bet 2024. So before we move into our final two segments, Danny, anything else you wanted to say about The Day of the Jackal?
I think I captured all of my notes. I kind of overall was impressed with the detailed execution of this. I was impressed by the on location shooting. I very much enjoyed as a whole. Just the overall execution, the tone of the film, the pace of the film, the sensibility of it all just worked very well for me, and I felt just very in sync, and kind of in sync with its rhythm, I would say, which is a nice feeling because going in completely blind to something that doesn't happen too often, where you kind of really get into how the movie's operating. And this, I think, just as a whole, worked very well for me. I liked Zinnemann's approach to the cinematography, to the editing, to even the lack of the score. It was something that I still very much was into, because I could feel where I would normally hear score, and it heightened me to everything else that was going on. So just as a whole, I think the directorial decisions, the acting choices, the commitment to this like sort of suave, slick, well-groomed, well-dressed criminal that is just extremely well organized, well planned, well strategized. All of the characterization, just as a whole, culminated very well for me. And outside of a few bits of critique here and there with the story, especially one at the end, very end, this as a whole was, I think, a successful watch for me.
That's fantastic. Yeah, I think you liked it more than I did, but I definitely appreciated the film, and I could see why it's been so revered for 50 years. And a lot of choices that you don't really see in any other movies around the same time. And Fred Zinnemann's obviously very talented director, and I think towards the end of his career, he would only make like one film every 5 years. Like he was very selective. So you can see that there's something in this story that he was really taken with. And I mean, I did find it very slow at times, especially in that first hour. But I think if you're a fan of spy thrillers and you've never seen this one, I think you will dig it. If you're a little bit more into that genre than I am, I think you'll really like it. And yeah, there's a lot to recommend about this. It's at times a very, very good film. All right, so that takes us to our final two segments. The first one is the Divine Double Feature. What's a modern film you would pair with The Day of the Jackal?
Yeah, so I really wrestled with this one because the two films that immediately came to mind were not modern,
Okay.
but I think could operate really well. One in particular, I do have to mention. This isn't my final answer, because we do want to do one in the 21st century. But the one that I really would have loved to pair with this is Les Samurai.
Ooh, okay. Why?
Because I think just the protagonist of that movie he's very sort of emotionless, calculated, driven, as a criminal act, and he's very just sort of anti the over the top emotion action sort of criminal figure that you would associate with maybe that drama. And so I think it's another example of the crime thriller operating at a very different register, that I thought would have paired well. I'm totally cheating here because I'm like describing to my two answers. But that would have been my answer. But that was, of course, made in 1967. So that would have actually predated this movie. My contemporary choice to fit the bill here, I'm going to go with The Girl with the Dragon Tattoo by David Fincher.
Ooh, good choice. That's another very cold, kind of like calculated movie.
Right. Very cold tone, cold cinematography, color grading to the whole thing. Elizabeth Salander at the core of it. Again, like, I think it would have been cool, like how we were talking about, would have been cool to see how maybe a female actress would have
Ooh, yeah.
portrayed the Jackal character. You know, I don't think there's like a maybe a direct comparison to Lisbeth, but she has that very much cold, ruthless, um, almost like a
Mm,
motionless approach to what she's doing. And I think that would be a really cool pairing to see how she and Rooney Mara portrays that
right.
character in comparison to how Edward Fox plays the Jackal. And yeah, I think Fincher's very calculated, methodical approach to the thriller, crime thriller genre would also pair well with how Zinnemann is approaching the execution on the direction here too.
That's a great choice. I love that movie. I'm so bummed we never got the 2 sequels with
Yeah,
Rooney Mara. Like, I guess
right.
the movie didn't it cost something insane? Wasn't like Girl with the Dragon Tattoo, the Fincher version, like $110 million budget or something?
Probably.
Insane. And it's like this long, cold, like it's not a movie that's gonna rake in like $500 million. I mean, I know it's based on a best-selling novel and everyone loved the book, but so I guess the movie it did okay, but it didn't like overperform in any way, and so they decided that the sequels would cost too much money, so they never made the other two. But I yeah, that's great. I mean, Fincher is one of my easily in my top 5 best living
Mm.
directors right now. Like he is just like on another level. If he is involved with a project, I'm there. And
Well, you're getting one this year.
he has one coming out in the fall called The Killer, right?
Yeah, maybe
With
that could pair with the Jackal. We'll
with
see.
Fassbender, Michael Fassbender will
Yes.
probably be a movie you could pair with Day of the Jackal.
Yeah.
Based on, I did a video about predictions, early predictions, and I did find like 6 or 7 stills from the production of that movie. It looks kind of like A Girl with a Dragon Tattoo. It's got that kind of vibe to it.
Mm-hmm.
And that looks really good. And The Girl with the Dragon Tattoo, just absolutely gorgeous cinematography, great characters. And that's an example of a great female character, beautifully acted by Rooney Mara. That was one of my favorite Oscar nominations that year, was her getting into Best Actress, because she was kind of touch and go there for a while. I think she only got in at Golden Globes, and then she didn't get in at like a couple of the other big ones. Was she in at SAG? She might have been in at SAG. She missed 1 or 2 big ones. So it was kind of like, is she going to make it in at the Oscars? And she did. And I was very happy about that. But that's a great choice. I went with another movie from 2011, which I was thinking about while watching Day of the Jackal. It gave me some similar vibes, kind of a spy thriller set during the Cold War. And I saw it once many years ago. Also kind of slow at times, also a little confusing at times. Big ensemble cast. I went with Tinker Tailor Soldier Spy. Did you ever see that?
That's a good. I actually watched that for the first time about maybe a year or so ago.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I
Yeah, I
saw
can
it
see
like when
that.
it came out. I saw it in the theater because Gary Oldman got an Oscar nomination for Best Actor. And I have this weird rule as a crazy Oscar person. Any movie, well, now now I have to see pretty much everything. But back in the day, my rule would be if the movie is nominated at the Oscars in any of the top 8 categories,
Mm-hmm.
picture, director, 4 acting categories, adapted screenplay, original screenplay, even if it was a one-off, even if it was just one, I forced myself to see it before Oscar night. And Tinker Tailor Soldier Spy was doing okay, I want to say, throughout award season. It might have gotten like a nomination here and there, but the Gary Oldman nomination was a big surprise. Like, that was not expected. He got in at BAFTA, but I don't think he didn't get in at Golden Globes. He didn't get in at Critics' Choice. Did not get in at SAG. So that was kind of like a late breaker nomination for him. The movie also got into original score and adapted screenplay. And it's got Colin Firth, right, straight off of his Oscar win for The King's Speech. This was his first movie following that. And Tom Hardy, an early Tom Hardy role. I mean, not early, but like, what did we watch? We watched Star Trek Nemesis, the 2002 Star Trek movie, and Tom Hardy is the villain in that. So he was acting long before this. But I want to say around like Inception 2010 is when we really started taking notice of Tom Hardy. So this is like one of his first films post Inception. And just a fantastic cast, really well made. John Le Carre, how do you say his name? Jean Le Carre, famous kind of
Yeah, yeah.
spy thriller novelist. Many of his books have been made into films and TV series. The Night Manager, The Little Drummer Girl, A Most Wanted Man, The Constant Gardener, and Tinker Tailor Soldier Spy. Just a terrific spy thriller, modern spy thriller that I think would pair nicely with The Day of the Jackal.
I think that's a great choice. I love Hoyt van Hoytema's cinematography in that movie too.
Yeah, looks gorgeous. Focus Features put it out. And if you haven't seen that one, great Gary Oldman performance if you're a fan of his work. He, of course, would win his Oscar a few years later for The Darkest Hour for 2017's The Darkest Hour. But probably my favorite nomination of his is Tinker Tailor Soldier Spy. It was so unexpected, and it's just a great turn from him. All right, our last feature here is Beyond the Flick. I thought we'd talk a little bit about Fred Zinnemann's career. So have you seen any of his other movies? Fred Zinnemann.
I have not. This was my first Zinnemann, and after this, I might have a whole new filmography to go through.
So I was like, Fred Zinnemann, I know the name. I recently made a video about Meryl Streep's kind of the beginning of her career. So I did a lot of research on her first film, Julia, from 1977, which was directed by Fred Zinnemann. He's the first director who kind of gave Meryl Streep a shot in a movie. She has a small role in that. So I knew of him from that film. That also got a bunch of Oscar nominations. It won 3, 2 in acting, one for Vanessa Redgrave and the other one for Jason Robards. It's funny, like that movie did really well. Like it did, I think it did pretty well at the box office, and then it did amazingly well with critics at the Oscars. And then Fred Zinnemann makes one more movie with Sean Connery called 5 Days, One Summer in 1982. Bombs, doesn't do well, and then Zinnemann said, I'm out. Like, I'm done. But you scroll through his list. First off, Zinnemann has 4 Oscars. He won 2, I want to say, for A Man for All Seasons for producing and directing. That's like his big Oscar hit is A Man for All Seasons from 1966, which I saw once when I was younger, and I didn't take to it very much. I've been meaning to revisit it. I've never seen The Sundowners from 1960. That's also, he got 2 nominations for that. He also won Best Director for From Here to Eternity, very famous, 53, kind of war film, romance film. He also won Best Documentary Short Subject Oscar in 1952. So he was busy. I would say his most famous films are Julia, and then A Man for All Seasons, From Here to Eternity, The Sundowners too, and High Noon. Have you heard of like High Noon and that Western from 52? Like, do you know much about that film?
A friend of mine's taking a class on Westerns.
Oh,
and I
okay.
think this is one that she mentioned. She's had to watch like 30 Westerns over the course of a semester, and she's just like completely drowned out, like never wants to watch a Western again. And I think this was on her list. I think she had mentioned it to me as that was one she saw. I can't remember what her feelings, probably not that positive because she's tired of watching Westerns, but
that might be, of the big major genres, probably my least favorite is the Western. Like it's never a genre that I'm really excited about. I've seen many great Westerns. They're out there. But usually I'm like, if it's like a 50s or a 60s Western, I'm like, okay, I guess. High Noon is one of the great Westerns. It is fantastic. I've seen it twice. I saw it the first time in film school. We screened it. I think it was like a 35 millimeter print for my, I think it was my American film class, or might have been another one I did. And it was just a gorgeous film. Lots of tension, great performances. That would be my favorite Fred Zinnemann movie. That'd be my number 1. Gary Cooper, Grace Kelly, kind of a little bit, just a touch earlier in her career before she does the Hitchcock films, Dial M for Murder, Rear Window, and To Catch a Thief. She's really great in High Noon. And lo and behold, you know how long High Noon is? An hour and 25 minutes.
No way.
It's an hour shorter than The Day of the Jackal.
Hour. Huh, how about that?
He like a lot of these directors, as they get more famous and they get more power, they get to the last decade of their career, they can stretch out those runnings. but not here. It is a svelte 1 hour and 25 minutes, and it's just a great story, beautiful cinematography. Probably, is it the best? I mean, it's in the top 3, definitely best films of 52 for sure, along with Singing in the Rain came out that year too. But and then I would say the other 2 really great ones to see are Julia from 77 with Jane Fonda and Vanessa Redgrave and Meryl Streep in an early role. And my number 2 pick would be From Here to Eternity. Do you know anything about that film? That's a very famous film.
I don't know anything about that film.
You've probably seen it in a montage somewhere of the couple making out, laying down on a beach as the waves crash into them. It's one of the most famous shots of any movie from the 50s, I would say. It's a very famous scene. But beyond that one scene, it's got Burt Lancaster, Montgomery Clift, Deborah Carr, Frank Sinatra, and Donna Reed all in the same movie. And it won 8 Oscars. Holy moly, I forgot it won that much. It won Best Picture. It won Best Actor in a Supporting Role for Frank Sinatra, Best Actress in a Supporting Role for Donna Reed, and Best Director for Fred Zinnemann, among many others. So those would be the 3. If you've never seen, obviously, Day of the Jackal, check it out. But I would say Julia, From Here to Eternity, High Noon, and then I need to see it again, but A Man for All Seasons from 66, Best Picture winner. That's also probably worth a look.
Yeah,
if you've never seen it. The other one I've never seen I want to check out is called The Nun Story, starring Audrey Hepburn. I'm a huge Audrey Hepburn fan. I've seen like maybe half of her films. There's still a few I need to check out. That I have not seen. And The Sundowners, starring Deborah Carr. That one looks interesting too. Anything else you want to say about Fred Zinnemann?
A lot of good stuff to get back to here. I would love to sift through a little bit more of his filmography now that I had such a strong appeal with this one, for sure.
So after you make your way through the 23 films of 2023 that run 2 hours 23, then you can start the long journey of 47 Fred Zinnemann movies.
Well, it sounds like the rest of my year is already planned out now.
you've got 2023 and 2024 planned. You're good to go. All right, that takes us to the end here. Danny, this was such a pleasure to have you back on Film at 50 as we wrap up. Love for you to tell our listeners where they can find you online and anything you'd like to promote. Now's the time.
Absolutely. So you can find me at DTJ Cinema on Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok, and at Danny Jarabek on Letterboxd. You can also follow and subscribe to my podcast where we talk about film as well, The Rolling Tape. You can find us on all social media platforms at The Rolling Tape. Listen to us wherever you listen to podcasts. So if you want to hear any more of my thoughts on movies, talking about movies, go check it out there, and you'll get plenty of it. So yeah.
And I'm doing that, right? Didn't you sign me up for, was it Singing in the Rain?
Ryan is on an episode that we're going to be doing later this year. It's tentatively planned for July. We'll figure out when we'll do that. But yes, you will be joining. We're going to be talking about a double feature surrounding movie musicals. Ooh. And we'll be kicking it off with Singing in the Rain. And then the audience will vote on what the second musical will be pairing that with will be.
Very nice. So I've seen Singing in the Rain one time 15 years ago, so I love to have an excuse to watch it again. That'll be fun. That's a great movie.
I'm very excited for that. That's gonna be a lot of fun. You reminded me. I was like, I totally forgot about it, and now I'm excited. Now I want to push it up in the schedule.
Yeah, no, if we can get to that this summer, that'd be fun.
Yeah, for sure.
So thanks for being here, Danny. Thanks to all of you for listening. You can find us online at filmat50.com. We're on Twitter and Instagram. Check out my YouTube channel, Brian Rowe Video, for all things Oscars. And until next time, remember, 50 never looked this good.